Van Dyck about his play King of Canada. Welcome everybody. This is a first for us. There may be some fun glitches. It's live, so that's all part of the excitement. We have in the chat room today myself, I'm the artistic director of Infinite Theatre. Off here to my left, if that's how you see it, is Ivan Smith, a Montreal actor. Ivan is also one of Infinite Theatre's go-to readers for our Right on Cue playwriting competition. So he has a bit of a nurturing wisdom as far as playwriting and scripts goes. We have Alexandria Haber. Alexandria, of course, playwright extraordinaire, had a great success at the Centaur Theatre earlier this season when it was a season. Alexandria, welcome. Alex is, of course, also the lead person in our playwrights unit at Infinite Theatre. Then you will see Paul in his nice blue shirt, Paul Van Dyck, the playwright himself. We'll get back to you in a second, Paul. Paul is in California. Unfortunately, he got locked down on the other side of the continent. We have Stetson, the Governor General's award-winning playwright, Montreal playwright from PEI. Welcome, Kent. Thank you very much for joining us. And we have Scott Humphrey with the earphones. Scott is a Montreal actor and full disclosure, also a friend of Paul's as well. So we are in the chat room. We are going to be discussing Paul's play. You are very welcome. If you're on the Zoom webinar, you are welcome to send in questions. We have a whole wonderful bunch of comments that have already been sent in from those of you who have read the play. Now, Paul, you have the courage to go first in this chat room concept. Paul, of course, is a producer himself. He's an actor and a playwright. In fact, Paul, if life had been somewhat different, wouldn't your play be on right now? Not this play, but another play on at the Seagull Center this very second?
Yeah, no, that would be, I got an email from one of the actors for this show, Siberian Summer, saying, oh, we'd be starting rehearsals this week for it. And I thought, oh, for God's sake. Well, yeah, so.
Yeah, the Siberian Summer got frozen out, as it were.
Very sad, yeah.
Indeed.
Among so many other shows that are being frozen. Yeah, it's a difficult time for sure.
Some of us are fighting on in different ways, as it were.
Oh, yeah.
So, Paul, because we just heard that there are people on Facebook that may not have read the play. There are also some people who've just signed up at the last minute who may not have had a chance to read King of Canada. Do you want to just start by giving us a little tiptoe into the play a little?
Sure. It is a kind of meta-theatrical political comedy about William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister, the longest serving Prime Minister in Canadian history. It begins with the audience being introduced into the room by a medium for the purposes of putting on a seance. And once the seance begins, a late arrival shows up, this gentleman who's Mackenzie King. And the play, it only has two actors in it, a man and a woman. The man plays King and the woman plays all these other characters. So the medium embodies significant characters from King's life, his mother and girlfriend, FDR, Winston Churchill, Adolf Hitler, and his three dogs all named Pat. And through becoming these different characters, you get a chronological sense of his story in a very kind of wacky, irreverent manner. And as the play goes along, you kind of realize that maybe it's more than just a seance, and King is, in the end, there to be adjudicated by the present day audience to decide should his legacy be lauded or condemned, and the audience kind of gets to vote at the end.
Okay, first of all, I got to congratulate you on a number of things. A lot of the feedback loves the concept of the seance. So we've got a lot of
Yeah.
that basically say, wow, this is a great idea for a play. But what's interesting there is that you, of course, somehow instinctively knew that the theaters were going to go dark. And the first theaters that are going to open up will be the small theaters. And therefore, a small audience of 20 at a seance is probably the very first thing that may come back. And we know live theater will come back. There will be a huge hunger for live theater very soon. So,
yes.
So this very clever of you to think of a very small concept for an audience for this. Can I ask you just again, just to keep starting, how did you get into, I mean, Canadian history, so, you know, puts everybody to sleep, and we know so little about it. How the hell did you get interested in Mackenzie King?
Well, I mean, Canadian history is pretty fascinating at times, and my original interest in King as a play came from another play I was working on, which was dealing with a plot line around the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And it was kind of a fantasy history of that era. And the main protagonist was a little girl and kind of telling it from her point of view in a fairy tale way. So she described the reason why it was happening was because the king of the land had banished them, and he happened to be crazy and talk to ghosts. And that was his little moment, his nugget in that show. But I did a bit of research further into him and thought he's such a strange and interesting person. I would love to tackle his story at some point, and read a number of biographies on him, and happened to be in my hometown of Brockville visiting my family, and they have a sort of late Victorian Edwardian mansion there called the Fulford Place, which is a Canadian Trust heritage building, and was once belonged to the richest person in Canada, this Mr. Fulford, who sold pink pills to pale people. So there's probably a play in his story somewhere as well. But you can go and you get a tour of this place, and they take you to this room in the basement. That's kind of an oval, dark room that apparently Mrs. Fulford would have her seance parties there. And they name drop that Mackenzie King had his first seance in this particular room. And that's actually where the idea was like, oh, well, wouldn't this be a great place to put on a play in the form of a seance, with Mackenzie King being the sort of star character? And from that came this idea of, well, what do I want to say about him? And incorporating him as a kind of wannabe Shakespearean anti-hero, like a would-be Macbeth, Hamlet, or Richard III, and but just with this dark comedic vaudevillian twist to it. So the idea to kind of create a very entertaining, wacky, irreverent Canadian history lesson, and then open up or continue the debate on, well, how do we deal with our past problematic leaders, and which is still going on, and then continue that debate into, well, what do we do about our present problematic leaders, which then leads to the question, well, what do we do about our present problematic selves? So my hope is, at the very least, you get a kind of 75 minutes of a super fun little show, and at the best you get a 75-minute fun show, but with this urge to kind of look at the bigger, grander, uglier journey of life and our perceptions of doing what's right versus doing what's convenient, and the ripple effect of our own individual choices that meet with other ripples, which become tsunamis. And perhaps it's always good to see, are they good ripples or bad ripples before they become tsunamis?
Okay, so that you just finished off there with some, I think, the touchstone of what your play is about. But you gave us a couple of questions to look at, and so we'll start easy on you. And once again, this is, you're very brave, and this is meant to be a real exercise exercise, so we will hopefully be challenging you at some times as well. But let's start on the easy side. Just throw it open. Your favorite moments in the read of the play as it stands at the moment. Does anybody want to kick in there? Okay, yes, Scott.
I realize I'm kind of jumping right into the middle of it here, but in terms of a moment that really stuck with me and I think is very funny, like you said, Paul, there's definitely there's a vaudevillian, almost clownish quality to the to the interplay between the two of them, which is a lot of fun. But as the play goes on, it kind of revs up into more and more absurdity until King gets to meet Adolf Hitler. The irony of calling him a good man or a great man, of course, is there, but also I think my favorite moment is just the confrontation of these two figures and then the bonding over their shared love of their mothers. I just thought it was really sweet in a really strange way. Yeah, made me laugh.
And Kent, you were...
Yeah, I was waving there. I will go for favorite moment. I'll go for favorite line in the piece, which leads me to some other considerations. If Canadian principles were not my principles, I wouldn't be the Prime Minister of Canada.
Right.
To me, this is the meat of the play, and at some point it'd be interesting. I'm not sure whether in this format is the time to do it, but I'm very interested in two concepts. One is presentism, and the other is chronocentrism. And just very, very briefly, presentism is the idea that we take contemporary values into our reading of the past, and we often use our present ethos as a stick with which we beat the past, and we come back to the present with a past that we've battered and somehow or other knocked about the head. Chronocentrism is the notion that we are the best generation that ever existed, and it's a generational thing. Because of the advancements of humanity, we are the best, and we have all the advantages that all those poor souls who came before us did not have. And the downside of that too is that we are the worst generation that humanity has ever possessed or produced. So when I'm working with historical figures, I try and keep these kind of ideas in balance. I think because balance essentially, when we're looking back and bringing the past forward, is essential.
Okay, but and that you're now speaking to the big theme that Paul was touching on, which is, can we judge past leaders with value systems of today, and to what extent is that value and at the same time, what Paul is trying to do is throw it right back onto us, I think, and have us judge ourselves in a certain way. Yes, Alex, a favorite moment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sort of piggybacking on what Kent said, one of the things that I really love about this play is that idea of presentism. I think that was the term you used. Yeah. And also the onus that it does put on us when we're reading the play, and the idea or the moment when King realizes that he's being judged for his life, but it's kind of too late, right? He doesn't have an opportunity to defend himself at those moments because it's all already happened. And I feel like that really highlights what you're talking about, this idea of it coming back onto us. And it makes it a very fulfilling experience, I think, watching the play. Particularly that moment for me really jumps out. I love that idea of it.
Okay. Ivan, go for it.
Yeah, the constant, the form you used was interesting because it kept talking to us now. It deflected exactly where we're at now and where he was then, and that back and forth of our values as opposed to his values. And you kept reflecting on that as opposed to thinking of something separate from us. So that was nice. But I also, just on a very visceral level, enjoyed, my favorite parts was Mom and Mathilde, and the whole maternal thing with him that I hoped would have woven even more than it did, was my favorite part.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of, Paul, again, from the comments that we've got in and my own feeling, there is so much energy and life and fun in what you are doing with this material, right? It moves so quickly. There are a couple of voices that say that the medium constantly changing characters may be a little bit of a challenge for one actress, and going from the Scottish to the South African to playing a dog and then doing Hitler and so on, all within the breath of a bark, as it were, almost, maybe too much, but I think those of us in the theater kind of say, well, wait a second, I want to see that challenge. I want to see that actress that can do it. And of course they can, they'll be able to do it. But there is so much fun to be had. I think there, to me, and Kent picked up one of my favorite lines as well. Another one is, it's what we don't do that counts in government, not what we do. And that becomes a kind of a king motto, I think.
That's an actual quote. That's an actual king quote.
Is the other one, the Canadian Principles, is that an actual
No,
quote,
that one's mine.
Is it?
Yeah.
I had another comment there, very quickly, Paul, if you don't mind. Just in terms of our perception and in terms of keeping the piece, I'm not balanced up to the point where it needs to become unbalanced dramatically.
Say that again. It's balanced up to the point that
in order to keep the piece balanced up to the point where it must become unbalanced, which is the climax, possibly. I'd be interested in knowing things like, how did King feel about Hitler after the war? Because I know that a lot of people who were socialist, not communists so much, but certainly socialists, felt that the National Socialist Party of Germany was on the right track until the madness appeared. And I think that I love the scene between Hitler and King, because we get a sense that these to a degree, there's a kind of madness in both. We get the sense that Hitler's madness is not, we don't know that it's not benign yet. We know about Mackenzie to think that his madness may be a little bit blind, but it's not malicious. So that was one of the questions that brings me to the whole notion of presentism. How does Mackenzie change through the course of the play was of interest to me.
Yeah.
And the question of, I wondered if I followed a different path, would I have been happier? Was an interesting one.
Good, but I'm moving slowly into what some people, your question, Paul, that you threw at us, what parts were confusing? Because I think you've got a railroad going, you've got the engine going very strongly. There are things that I don't understand, so I have a couple of questions for you. You pretty much refrain from dates. It's almost as if you want to keep away from a history lesson, so that I'm never quite sure when the King Byng affair takes place, and those things. So maybe, is that a choice to keep it ahistorical a little bit that you had, as opposed to bogging us down into a kind of a textbook of biography of his life?
Yes, in a way. I think there's a lot that you could say about this man, and I mean, he was in power for 22 years, And I think it's one of the earlier drafts did have a lot of dates in it, and it did bog things down and become a little bit confusing, and it felt like it was giving a lot of importance to the dates, which ultimately I think it's you know,
did anybody else feel that I felt at times confused as to actually the timeline of some of the events in it? Was that a worry for anybody else?
It didn't matter to me.
Okay, so the whole thing is such a metaphor, so the colors are so strong, you don't need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it's also the setup too, because we're not in real time, we're not in real territory. We're in a triple seance at some layers.
Yeah.
Yes.
At some levels, we have ghosts in visiting other people's seances, which is really fun.
Yeah. We've heard of most of their names, so we're familiar in terms of putting it in some chronology. It just seemed to happen. Dates didn't matter though. No.
Okay.
Okay. So then the other thing, confusing question I throw out to you, when he comes in, it seems as though we're seeing Mackenzie as if he's been in limbo since he died, and he's now approaching us from that limbo. He's been freed, and where he's arrived to be judged in the now. But then suddenly it's as if he goes retro, and he suddenly suddenly he's part of his own history. So he's sitting in his mom's lap or something, or he's getting his new dog, or he's meeting Hitler in the here and in the now. So is that confusing for anybody? Was that confusing? That I didn't know exactly who he was when.
Not for me, Guy, because I just got the sense of that kind of outside of temporal reality flow.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
and I guess I would just very quickly say the actor is going to tell us a lot too.
And I think as the play moves along, you sort of start to figure it out, like maybe initially it's a little bit like you're like, what is happening? But by the time we get further into it, we understand what's happening, right? We understand that he's going through different moments of his life, that he's, it starts to evolve as the, like the moments I think become clearer to us, at least for me, by the end, I think you're very clear on looking back, you go, oh, I see what was going on, which I always think is interesting in a play, actually, because you don't always want to know everything right from the beginning. I think it's more interesting to watch it and for an audience to, be trying to figure it out as they're going along, as opposed to it being, so laid out specifically.
All right. So, yes, Scott.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to chime in as well that I also didn't really have an issue with the sort of either the chronology or the placement of King, because he's tricked is the wrong word, but he's invited in and decides to play the game along with the audience, right? His first meeting is with his mother, and he's so excited to speak to her again that we then sort of come to accept that that's how he's going to be interacting with the medium. And I actually almost put the original setting to the side in my reading of the show, right? That's how I felt as I was along for the ride as we went.
And
I think that's really interesting, because at a certain point I began to think, I love what you say, Scott, in terms of him being tricked, because up to a certain point, and I can't give you a page number, it feels a bit like a kangaroo court. And I would like the defendant at least to know he's on trial.
Is there, and you sort of deal with this. I mean, I'm being a bit anal here and asking for, precision as to when and where he is and so on. But you actually deal with that question, Paul. What you say. What is the line you have? Don't follow that thread too tightly, or it'll unwind all the logic or something. I've forgotten the phrase, but you do actually take that on. You take my question right on in the play, right?
There are a lot of threads that we don't want to pull too tightly on. And the question of when does the defendant realize he's on trial is a question that I have for myself. I'm wondering, when should that occur? I feel as if it needs to occur for it to be in any way some sort of a fair trial. He needs to defend himself, but it really comes late in the game. I don't think in the present draft he really gets that this is a trial of his legacy until the last 10 pages or so. And
I had the urge, and it's much easier to say than to do.
yeah,
is to start the play with the last 3 pages.
right. Yeah.
I think just having read the play before a few times, but I know it's something that has come up a couple of times too. And with this piece is like, when does he know, and how would it change things if he did know? And it's a tricky one too, because it is so tied in with this idea of like, how are we viewing the past? Like, because like what, like, are we seeing, is he allowed to see things from the perspective of where he was at the moment, which would be like, he didn't know what was going to happen, what was coming to happen? Or is it like, now that you've lived your life, here are these moments, you get to look at them again or live them again. So what are you going to do differently about it? Which kind of puts us in it a little bit more as the audience, and maybe gives him more of a fair shake, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I mean, would he change? Who knows? We don't know, but yeah.
Yes, Scott.
Yeah, sorry. No, I assumed that having Mackenzie King not kind of understand the situation that this situation that he's found himself in until near the end was very intentional, only in the sense that he's able to, well, from our perspective, let it all hang out, warts and all, so to speak. You know, he's able to be selfish and self-involved and all of the other, I mean, look, I'm a little biased clearly, but like he's able to be his true self in all of his interactions until the moment where he clues in, which I don't think it could come too early. If it did, then maybe you'd have to rewrite scenes with him attempting to replay them with different outcomes. And I don't know if that's the play that you're writing.
But then if it did come earlier, he might be defending himself more, which may put more at stake. I don't know. That's a possibility. I mean, one of the comments that somebody made was, where I didn't hear the starting pistol go off. You know, why does this happen now? Why does this seance necessary at this point?
Well,
yeah, I may not have answers to these questions, but yeah. I'm taking notes of them. Just so
I think if the audience knows it's a trial right from the start, it puts their mind in another framework. And I hate to use the word cliche, but I think audiences get into that mode of, oh, he's on trial and I'll pay attention in a different way, as opposed to going on this organic journey, which in fact is the seance. And we don't know. Things are not clear. We don't know what is real, what it's part of his psyche, yet there's a small audience, and strange things are happening. And who is this person with all these 33 voices coming out of her? And I like the fact that it's not clear until the end in terms of what's really happening. The trial part, I wouldn't.
But how then, Ivan, would you structure it so that he fights a little bit harder on his own behalf? It's interesting, Paul, that in the comments that we got, where you asked at the end, you said, you know, which would you give him a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the judgment? And because the audience is offered the possibility, everybody gets a coin, and is offered the possibility to put it in one box or another, and one will send him to heaven, presumably, and the other send him to hell. I'm not quite sure if that's how you structure your universe. But it's certainly going one place or the other, a good place or a bad place in our historical judgment. And I don't know whether he gets to fight hard enough on his own behalf. So maybe something I mean, in 1997, you know, they did a sondage of Canadian historians, and he was the best prime minister in our history, according to Canadian, a bundle of Canadian historians. What was it? Maclean's Magazine or something did the survey, right? And certainly since then, we haven't had anybody to be better than him, corrupt Mulroney or, whatever.
The interesting thing too, I think this debate about what we know when may be expanded into terms of tone. So my one fear until about maybe page 35 or 40 was that the tone was coming from a place possibly of ridicule. That we were being introduced with a judgment already that the man was a clown and a fool. And that troubled me because I'm just referring back to Guy's comment about stakes for the guy, because it still can be comedy, and I think it gets even more powerful as comedy if the sense of ridicule that you're using, he gets a chance, which I think from a sense of pathos, to defend that. He said, there is that kind of sense that if he begins to defend himself, it would be in being perhaps misunderstood, rather misquoted, disrespected essentially.
Okay, so we get to the interesting question here of the mixture of seriousness and comedy.
Yeah.
And
I have a quote here. Do you want to hear a cool quote?
Yeah.
This is from Athena Seyler, S-E-Y-L-E-R. She was a great British actress in the beginning of the century, and very comedic. She's a great comedian, evidently. And she was writing letters to a young actor. She was in her, I think, mid-50s at the time, and she was writing letters to a young actor who became, he was wanting to study comedy, who became a soldier, and interestingly enough, coincidentally, died of the Spanish flu. Anyway, that's a sidebar. The quote is, "Comedy is the sparkle on the water, the gay surface, the glint of sunlight, not the depths underneath. But note, the waters must run deep underneath. Comedy must be founded on truth and an understanding of the real value of a character before it can pick out the highlights. It is only when one understands a person that one can laugh at him."
Well, I mean,
Nice.
they are, in a certain sense, comedy, tragedy. They're slightly artificial. I mean, Shakespeare actually never designated any of his plays a comedy or a tragedy. And, if done well, something like Romeo and Juliet's a comedy up until Mercutio dies. And then the comedy basically gets us laughing so that when the sword slips in and the seriousness is there, we get it twice as strong. So that's kind of how I felt with what you were doing as well. You had the license to make fun and to be funny and to get us enjoying it. But then at the very end, those last couple of pages that you had, you suddenly got very heavy and serious. And it had more power because of that. I would even urge you, I think you have the right to get more serious more quickly, sooner in this, because
I would agree, absolutely.
Just before we move too far away, you had made the comment about the starting pistol, and I just wanted to say that, like, for me, I feel like there's and maybe I made it up, but it felt like the obvious reason that it's happening now is because he's just died. I feel like that's why the play is being told at the moment. Like, it's like he's now dead, so we have a decision to make on how we're going to carry his memory forward.
Okay, but has he just died, Paul, or what is the situation?
Well, I always sort of assume that it was, I mean, we're dealing with sort of ethereal levels of reality, but it was a modern day audience kind of reacting to this guy from 70 years ago who had died 70 years ago. So it wasn't as if it were some kind of heavenly fates judging him on the day of his death. It was, again, the future generations looking back at his legacy and picking away at it, which makes the audience an audience of today, rather, and the adjudicators sort of.
But yeah, because in the end, you turn it on us, Paul, right? In the end, you say, okay, you think you can judge yourself, right? And that to me is what the starting pistol should be, right? That's why you've written this, because it's really easy to judge someone in retrospect. Now, who's going to be judging us in 50 years' time? You know, and
exactly.
And I think that I mean, I did know that that the audience was our audience, but I thought that like, I guess in my mind, I was doing that like Kent was saying about the time being sort of very different there, is that the audience in the play audience, where he's just died and they're the medium and him, like that there's an audience there. I'm assuming that there's an audience at the seance that I'm watching, even though I'm not seeing that audience, and that the other audience, when you turn it around, is us. That's what it feels like to me watching it.
Okay.
And they're watching it just as it's happened. He's just died. They're coming. We're judging, and they're putting this show on all for us to see. Like that was how I worked.
I think the other element that might figure there is how do we judge without trusting the knowledge we're given to make the judgment on.
Yeah, how do we trust what we're given? But it does feel, a lot of people, Paul, did feel, and in their comments they said that you had judged him unfairly, and that in fact you were leading us into condemning him with the play, as opposed to genuinely giving some kind of balance on it. I mean, the guy, you know, when you look at the history books, he was in the war effort. He got Canada behind the war effort in a way that no other country in the world is second to none. You know, in terms of the percentage of people that volunteered and what we did and what we gave into the war, and people will say that that's Mackenzie King. You know, that was his ability to get everybody behind the war effort, even before he had the conscription crisis or the conscription. You know, Scott.
I would argue though that Paul, I mean, like, let me know if I'm way off base here. I would argue that as the playwright, or, you know, as a sort of alternate historian, if you will, that you're making the point that we can pick and choose whatever facts about a life that we want in order to present a picture of a person, right? Like, I don't disagree, Guy, in the sense that fact is, I mean, relatively indisputable, but that also, if you read Mackenzie King's diary, if you read, you know, material written by him and about him, that he's a weird dude, for lack of a better word. He's a very strange man, and definitely had a lot to say on subjects that, you know, today we reflect back on unfavorably, and potentially even at the time.
The concern that I always have with that argument, Scott, is that by presenting one side of a person's character, we're not getting, you know, as Athena Saylor says to us, we need to know as much as possible. But the other element is, that I think is important in any kind of piece of contemporary art in particular, is that we're not just picking and choosing. And if we are picking and choosing, let us know we are picking and choosing. Or this is what, you know, this is the style of the work we're doing. It's meant to, in one level, restrict and reduce a person and what we know about them. And I find that a little dangerous.
Just by the way, just a sidebar here, Sandra Stevenson has typed in that it would make a great radio play. Then maybe with The Theater's Dark, do it as a radio play. That's a great idea. But BBC got out of doing radio plays long ago. So first we got to get them back into the business of doing, which, by the way, I love, because they're plays that go straight into your head. You know, without interfering with you know, your imagination gets to fire itself up. Anyway,
and you can set them absolutely anywhere.
That's right. Yes. But it certainly would be a good thing for a radio play. All those quick you know, non-costume changes, but just vocal changes and so on would work very well on a radio. Sorry, we're going back to judging history. And would it be your intention, Paul, to, would you consider you had written the play as it should have been written if at the end of a night there was roughly an equal number of coins in each box?
I feel as if the coin is almost a moot point at that stage. And I think one of the comments was something, well, where would I put my coin? And I'd keep it. Like, I don't think, or I'd throw it in the damnation box and just be like, yeah, and leave it at that. But the initial, one of the impetuses for writing the play was in reaction to the glorification and the reverence that we have for Canadian history. And I feel as if I don't think we discuss the dark parts enough. I mean, they were dark when they happened, and King knew the choices that he was making. Even in Parliament, he had a line that he had a speech where he said, we shouldn't look at what is most politically expedient, but we should act on how we will be judged by future generations. However, that speech was to bring in Jewish refugees during World War II. His whole party turned against him, the whole country turned against him, and he said, oh, right, well, you guys don't want refugees, so forget what I said. We're not bringing them in. And so during my research of King, I kept sort of looking for the redeeming elements. And what I found was he is conscious of the mistakes he was making for the most part, that we judge even now as mistakes, but he still would never admit to ever making a mistake. He left Parliament saying he has no regrets. So that line about, do you have any regrets? Do you have any regrets? And he's constantly saying he has no regrets. That's him being given the opportunity. For me as a playwright, reading all of his diaries, saying like, where are you going to be honest with us? And there was one line, I took it out, I might try and bring it back in to give the humanity of the character, but he does have a line in his diary where he says, I have made so many mistakes in my life. I have no one that I look at my friends and I see that they are happy and they have families, and I am a sad, lonely man living a life of delusion in my own past. And this is the one line in his 50-some thousand page diary that kind of even cracks the surface of anything but a hubris.
Did you read all 50,000 pages?
Oh God, no. I think there's only 3 people in the world who have actually read the entire thing, right, and they were not impressed. They
died, right? And they're dead. No.
But
Ned Cox wants that line back in, Paul.
Yeah, and even sort of getting to know him as I have, I sort of sympathize with him in a lot of ways. The 20th century in politics was racist and sexist, and that's just how it was. And he was able to sustain his role in politics because he was doing the bidding of the people.
And that attitude began to dissolve. It's a 20th century attitude that found its greatest strength and then its greatest collapse after the Second World War.
But it still exists. I watched a documentary on basically not the inconvenient truth, but the next one, basically the climate change issue, and they were talking about Obama, how he was you have speeches of him saying, I'm very uncomfortable with same-sex marriage. And then 4 years later, when everybody was like, no, this needs to happen now, he was like, I'm very proud to be able to bring this into fruition. And he's not, who knows what his real opinion is, but in order to maintain a level of power, he's doing what the majority wants him to do. And I think, that's how King, I think that's, basically most politicians.
It's kind of inherent in the whole notion of democracy, because when you look at the alternatives, and I also always loved what Pearson said about government, particularly in a democracy, being the skillful use of blunt instruments, and back to that, my favorite line in your piece: if Canadian principles were not my principles, I wouldn't be the prime minister.
Yeah.
So there is that. There is currently a kind of harshness, I think, in our general kind of discussion around things political and social and civic in particular. It's because of the way we're so heavily fractured now generationally.
I'm sorry, I'm going back in because I don't think, I absolutely agree we want to see the dark side, as you call it, Paul, but I do not think that we get the value of what this guy did. You know, he was the one who went to London in 29 or wherever it was, the Imperial Conference, and said, no, we are an independent country, you know, and he fought the whole main, you know, all of the dominions. Everybody was saying what a pain in the ass this guy is. But then they passed the Statute of Westminster in 31, and lo and behold, you know, Canada somehow or other gained some sense of its own independence. I mean, he did pull off a few things, and there are reasons why people elected or, you know, voted him as the best prime minister.
Yeah, one of those seems to be as well. I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate. I'm going to shut up after this. But the other thing that was interesting with Roosevelt too. Roosevelt gave him some credit for how they pulled at least North America out of the Depression. It's a really interesting notion in that regard.
Ivan, I'm curious. Have I got anybody on my side here that we need to give him a bit more credit and not just a buffoon?
Well, I think that the one-liners right at the end, like you did this about Japanese internment camps, about, you know, you list various things that he's done. If he was to defend himself a little more, maybe that would be the point, where he talks a little more about his justification for what he did. If that's important. To me, it was very strong that those lines are there in the first place. And I guess we all know a little bit about what he did historically, but maybe it does need to be more spelled out, you know, the racism, the fact that he was going to sell all the Japanese property to pay for the internment camps, all that stuff can come out a little more in terms of strength, because I think you feel it's too weak at that point, Guy.
Well, I'm saying partially the opposite, but I certainly don't think we should, you know, hide over what you know, the dark side politically of him as well. But there is a reason why he was reelected, and he did pull the country out of the Depression. He did mobilize the country in the war effort. He did give Canada a sense of its own nationhood. That's what people, you know, thought of him as being a great prime minister for. And he wasn't just a buffoon.
He did what he was asked to do by the people.
I'm sorry to jump in. I just I mean, again, this is my sort of interpretation, but I got the sense that the reason that Mackenzie King was selected as the subject for this show was because he has a relatively positive reputation, and then the show paints him as, again, a bit of a clown in the sense of like a vaudevillian character, so that at the end we can say, okay, reflect back now and reflect upon yourselves. That's the sense I got, is that he's a perfect character in order to make that point, because we have a certain perception of him, and then that perception is changed by the show, rather than to be painted as someone who has both fine people on both sides. Do you know what I mean? Sorry for that term, but anyway, that's.
Were there any other confusing moments that anybody wants to mention to Paul? Anything else in terms of being able to just follow the story, follow the script?
Well, at one point there were too many people saying too much about too many different things. I didn't catch on to everything. I have to go back and reread it, and I don't know if an audience will, who's just listening to it for the first time. So if that matters, then I found that part confusing.
I'm going to go back to ask you then, Paul. You know, obviously the encounter with Hitler is something that everybody is going to. You know, once again, I don't think our history is taught in such a way that people even remember that necessarily.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, he wasn't the only one that saw good things in Hitler at the time. You know, a lot of American corporations made a lot of money in Germany at the time as well. But you have at the beginning of that section, you have him say, it sounds as if he's talking to us to explain away Hitler as if it were a setup. You know, what is it? You say, oh yeah, I'm giving him something really good or whatever. But then later on, we see, and it's as if he knows what he did with Hitler. But then 3 pages later, he's actually, you know, sharing stories about mothers with Hitler, and they're dancing and having a good time together. So I couldn't, there again, the time frame of who was speaking, where was he, I got confused.
Okay.
I
mean, I'll say this about the structure, that seems that he is abreacting these experiences.
Yeah.
So he's in his own whimsical way, and he's gaining the power to sort of step outside them and comment on them. So when he's talking to the medium, he is in some sort of present tense.
Right.
And the medium is egging him on to jump into the next one, and once he's in them, he's in them. He can. I feel there's a lot of these sort of meta theatrical winks and nods at the audience, where he can comment on a scene that he is playing out, and then jump back into the scene.
It goes to what Kent was saying, is, you know, you buy into it all. It's and I'm being a little bit too anal here and trying to get everything, you know, in its proper place, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, any other questions for Paul?
Was the Dr. Meyer?
Yeah.
I really wanted to hear more from him.
Oh yeah, really. He existed. He helped quite a bit, and I guess he was going through quite a depression in his life after.
Yes, because from a psychoanalytical point, he puts a lot of things in perspective. But I wanted a little more banter to get the patient side more view of his inner medical condition.
Maybe it's an opportunity to get that out there.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, I think, that back to your notion, Paul, which I really love, that the business about, you know, having no life, being and judging himself really harshly as being some kind of failure because he didn't have a traditional kind of family structure or a system to fall back on. Being evident from what I can gather, not having been in the position of never ever wanting to be, being the leader of the country is totally all-consuming, and it consumes you body, mind, and spirit. And to do this for what, 30 years?
22 years he was in power, but as a leader of the Liberals, it was I think 30 years he was.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that we should, you know, sort of genuflect and bow to his self-sacrifice, but I love that business in the piece where he's so hard on it. Because,
say that again, Ken?
Because I love the part in the piece toward the end where he's so hard on himself. And I think that, you know, to me that is extremely, it reveals what we have to, what not only prime ministers, but we all have to contribute in order to achieve some kind of excellent life. It's too bad that he, you know, if he was born today, it would be quite a different matter. He wouldn't have had those thoughts. You know.
I have a question, Paul. At the end, you have the character King, and then the medium becomes Mackenzie King.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Imagine now you're not the writer, you're the director. How do you stage that suddenly the medium has been the dog and has been the mother and has been whatever, but now because is it a character of a different order that suddenly that medium has to become Mackenzie King, that they become mirrors of each other?
Yeah, you could even, I think you could have some of that fun sort of duck soup, Marx Brothers kind of routine to play it out. But it was an idea that early on, I'm like, how do we wrap this up? And one thing was, let's give this actress another chance to just do a tour de force, rapid fire of all the major characters she played. And
Right.
then how do you top that? Well, let's have her do a caricature of the caricature that the other actor is performing. So, and all of that, what both of those characters are saying in those moments are direct quotes from King. So those aren't my lines. It's just showing the duality of one person with that motif or the theme of a coin being tossed in the air, and what side does it land on. So the idea that, okay, this person meant well, however, they did say this, and this, and we just juxtapose the dichotomy of this person, and see where
I have. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to leave.
Okay.
I have a 6 o'clock thing. May I just have one parting word, Paul? Congratulations. I love what's going on there. My only urge would be 20 more minutes, please.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No,
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Leaving the meeting. Ciao, ciao.
Well, I think that's a good time to wrap things up anyway. But Paul, just have you written this for any particular actors, or are you?
I've had a few actors in mind, but and had a few read it actually. So it's I think there's certainly some people in mind that I've thought of for these roles, and I would I would cherish the opportunity to see some people sink their teeth into this. I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So the audience is always 20 or less.
I don't know. One place that I had some interest in putting it on was at King's actual estate in Gatineau, it's Gatineau Park, and just north of Ottawa. And he's got sort of a ruin of a church there that he was building. Parts of it were from like rubble from Westminster Abbey during World War II, and I just kind of imagined why maybe an outdoor performance in which we're all sort of
outdoor is good. Outdoor is very good.
Yeah.
These days, social isolation, etc. We can manage that. So, Paul, thank you very much for being the guinea pig. I'm sure we're going to be able to refine this whole concept a little bit. Alex, thank you. Ivan, thank you. Scott, thank you very, very much for your participation. Ken, thank you in absentia. And next week, Oren Safdie is in the hot seat. Same time, same place. And hopefully we will see you all again then. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciated that. I took lots of notes for it. So.
Okay, great. All the best.
To the next draft.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.